Hello and welcome to Take a Wander with Shebs. Now my guest today is Travel Camel's Shane Dallas. Shane, a keynote speaker, conference director and a photographer, spoke to me about how he fell in love with travelling. One of the topics we talked about was his photography. These are some of Shane's magnificent photos as we discussed the state of photography as it is today. Plus we talked about why he travels the road less travelled and the meaning behind him starting his weekly Twitter chat, TRLT. All of that and much more in my talk with Shane. So let's take a look. Shane, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. How are you?
I'm doing wonderfully, actually. It's a magnificent sunny day, not a cloud in the sky here in Nairobi, and the weather's in the high 20s, so it's tremendous weather.
People who don't know who you are, just introduce yourself.
My name is Shane Dallas. I write under the name The Travel Camel. I've been writing under that name for nearly 20 years, so it's quite a long time. I'm also a keynote speaker. I've been public speaking for more than 30 years. I've been doing travel photography for more than 30 years, and I'm also a conference director.
Where did the initial love for traveling start?
Well, I'm from Australia, and my mother's side of the family come from Adelaide. 700 kilometres away is my father's side of the family. And when I was a boy, and I mean I was a boy, 5, 6, 7, we used to travel between the two quite a bit, the mother's side of the family and then the father's side of the family. So when we're in Adelaide, lived in Adelaide, we travelled to Melbourne. When we lived in Melbourne, a few years later, we travelled back to Adelaide. And so from a young age, we always took these family road trips. And I remember leaving Adelaide, and I'd sit in the car, and I was so small, I couldn't see. I'd sit in the front seat, and I couldn't see over, so I'd sit on my legs, and I still do it to this day when I fly. I'll put my legs underneath me, and I prefer sitting in A seats because that's where the passenger is. And so things really haven't changed. It's amazing, that influence. And I would look out at the windows where my mother and sister were sleeping in the back. I'd turn around and they're sleeping. My father's driving, and he loved his driving on country roads. He did a lot of work in the country, so he drove a lot. And I'd sit and I'd look at the new signs. Back then, we talked in Australia in miles, back in the early 70s. So there would be mile posts, which are now replaced by kilometre posts. And I just thought every new town was something new. Every place we passed through was something new. And that started at a very young age when everything I saw was new and different on the road. And that really was the start. And then the first major road trip we did was in 1977, where we moved from Melbourne in Victoria, which is the second largest city, up to the Gold Coast, which is now the tourist capital of Australia. Back in 77, it really wasn't. It was getting there. But back then, 1977, for those listening to Australia, the Gold Coast had enough high-rise buildings you can count on two hands, and now it's got dozens upon dozens. It was a very different place. And that was a really long road trip. That took 2 nights on the road to get there with a young family. Then I had 3 brothers and sisters, not just one. And so we had to take it in steps because the 2 youngest were really young. It was too hard. And I just thought it was the most amazing journey ever. It was amazing. And when I got old enough to start traveling, first overseas journey in 1986, I headed off to New Zealand, something a bit similar to Australia. And my advice for anyone traveling is take it in steps, go a step at a time. And that was the first trip. And then more overseas trips followed. And so it really started at a very young age from those road trips with the family back in the 1970s in South Australia and Victoria.
In terms of education then, were you set out, were you looking to get into the travel industry? Because obviously you do it now. Was that the case, or did you go into a different field altogether?
I had no intention at all getting into the travel industry. So my first university degree was actually economics. And I dropped out of it because I loved it at high school, the secondary school, the last year, 2 years. It was fantastic. I went to university and it just was so dry. The lecturers and everything, it just didn't work for me. So I dropped out. But I never intended to do that. For my first big overseas trip, which was 91, 92, that was, I saved for years before going on that trip. And my aim was to do 3 things in the 1 year, 1992. It was to go running with the bulls in Pamplona, Spain. It was to go to the World Expo in Sevilla, and also to attend the Barcelona Olympics, attend the opening ceremony. And I had, and that was, and I was away for a year then. And back then, there was no Schengen visa. So as an Australian, I could stay in Europe for a very, very long time, which I did. It was 10 and a half months. And there were no restrictions. But I mean, it was a bit different back then because when I was in Germany, I needed mark. And when I was in France, I needed francs. And every country I went to, and it was Zloty and Polish, Poland, and everything. But every country had a different currency, so it was, and then you had to get visas. So back then it was visas such as I needed a French visa, believe it or not, and then I needed visas a place like Czechoslovakia, which it was then, and Poland and Hungary. I needed all visas, so it was a lot more, and even needed a visa for Spain. So it was a lot more different back then traveling. In fact, I personally think it was easier back then because of there was no Schengen. You didn't have the 3 months and 6 month rule, which means you could stay a long time. So the whole thing was traveling. Then I came back, got into other work, worked for the family company. Then I became a government investigator, worked for the federal government, and I would just take holidays whenever I could. And if I couldn't travel overseas because of finances or time, I'd always travel locally. And Australia's a big country, so there's always you could travel a long way without going out of the country. And that was the whole point. And it was when I was made redundant in 2012 from my government job, and I then travelled overseas. And the whole point was just to, I decided I could stay in Australia or I could go overseas, take the risk, go overseas, not have any guarantees of what was happening when I went, and see where the journey took me. And that's what I did. So it was actually quite a risk. People said, "Oh, you were quite brave to do that in my late 40s, going overseas one way with no plan." And at the time, it just seemed the most logical step. But looking back at it, I think it was actually quite brave. So at the time, it just seemed the best option. And then what was happening is I was photographing, and I'm always one who likes visiting less traveled places. So in 2010, 28, I went to places such as Syria, 2010 into Yemen. And then I had more time to plan some of these places. And so then I went through Central Asia, places like Tajikistan, Afghanistan. And then I was in Kurdistan and Iraq. I went to Somaliland as well. And it was all 2013. And it was interesting because I would then share these on social media. And I had hardly any knowledge of social media. So I just put them on social media, sharing here and there. And that's what got me noticed. Social media launched my career in this area where my passion became my profession. And what happened then is people started noticing, wow, this guy called the Travel Camel was sharing photos from really different places. And then my first ever media trip was with Fly Dubai, the UAE based carrier, and that was to Ukraine, the inaugural flight to Kiev. And then about the same time I was invited to that, 2 weeks later, literally, no, it wasn't even 2 weeks, it was the same week, I got an invite to speak at TBEX in Ireland and Dublin in 2013. And suddenly it opened up all of Europe to me and opened up all these opportunities to me. And now I've become TBEX conference director for Europe, the same event I spoke at, and also for Asia and Africa. And it just seemed that month, that September, that from that mid-September to that early October, everything changed. And suddenly I had fallen into the career. And it was never intended. I never thought when I left, I thought I was going to do something similar to what I did in Australia or something related to that. And then now I'm in the travel industry, and I literally just fell into it. It was just something that I was doing because I loved doing it. There was never any intention to make it a career. And then it just happened that opportunities came my way. One speaking opportunity led to more, to speaking at conferences, to speaking at travel trade shows. And then I got more invites to go to different places, and it just blossomed and blossomed. And there was no plan. There was no plan at all. I wasn't that smart to think of that plan, I can tell you.
And you said you did it at a very late stage. There's no sort of plans of being in the travel industry. But sometimes, obviously, if you had a passion for travel from a young age, and then something come, because your career path can completely change. You were right about social media. Social media is a strange thing. You can make, it can make you quite easily make you. So, and it only takes one person to watch what you're doing. Some of the places you mentioned as well, they're very remote places where people don't really go to. And in fact, where did that initial wanting to go to those types of places rather than the tourist hotspot, where did that initial love come from then?
1992, going to Turkey.
Okay.
So, my first visit to the Middle East was 1992, and I just didn't stick to the West. I went to the East, to places like Urfa and Diyarbakir, and that was really frontier stuff. I mean, I think I saw two other foreigners in the week and a half there in that region.
Actually, I can relate to that. I only went to Turkey last year, and I went to Diyarbakir and Urfa as well. Hardly any tourists there whatsoever.
Yeah, and back in '92, it certainly was. It was frontier stuff. There's no question, frontier stuff back then, and it just the energy of these places and the people and the hospitality of the Kurds and the food is. You've been there. The food is just phenomenal, isn't it? It's one of the great travel destinations of the world. And when I compared that, now I'm Australian. Okay, so my dad's Australian. My mum was born in Germany. And then when I went back into Europe, everything seemed so settled and ordered and quiet. And from that day, and that's not saying it's not good. Of course, it's great. It's got its own benefits as well, but it didn't excite me as much. It was beautiful. There's no question. Traveling through the cities of Europe and places like Italy and Spain, I mean, magnificent experiences. But suddenly, there was an energy I had in Turkey. There was an energy and an excitement that I never had. And the next time I had that was 10 years later when I traveled to Jordan. And then suddenly I'm in Jordan, and that same feeling came back again. And from that trip, Jordan, Egypt, it was then a regular. I regularly traveled to these places, and that's really what started it. It wasn't possible in the late 1990s to travel that much for me. There's various factors I won't go into, but it just wasn't possible. But when 2002 came and I started it, it then began. I went to India 2004, 6. 2008 was Lebanon, Syria. 2009 was North Korea. 2008 was also China. And to attend the Olympic Games, another one. And it just built and it just increased. So when I had all that free time in the end of 2012, so 2013, somebody think, wow, I can plan a trip to Central Asia. And given how long it takes you to get visas to go around, I could actually spend 7 weeks there, and I don't actually have to apply for leave anymore. And this is when it changed. I could then go to Ethiopia, which I think was my fourth trip. And instead of just spending 2 weeks there, I could spend a month. And I was able to extend everything and explore more. And the slower you travel, the better the travel is, and the better my photography becomes. And that was a real key. The fact is that I was able to spend more time in places, and my photography improved, which have been shared on social media, which then got noticed, and then hence the change in direction.
And can I talk to you about your photography? Because you do have some incredible photos. You may have noticed the way things have changed over the last few years. Let's just say and I mentioned how social media can be brilliant, but social media can also be a detriment in some respect. And I had a guest on recently, and he made his name in the world of travel through photography. But he said to me, "No, I was a photographer, but I don't class myself as a photographer anymore." And I asked why, and he said, "With the way photography has gone, you used to have Pulitzer Prize winners or National Geographic photographers making a living out of it. You can make money from it, but now," he said, "Instagrammers are now making more money from the fact that you can take a selfie with a six pack." And it seems to be photography is, well, the money is more in that now. So where do you see photography? Because the other thing about photography is when you look at some of the pictures that you do on social media, they seem very manipulated, manufactured, a lot of editing going on there, and you think to yourself, what is anything that you see real? Because when I look at your photos, I see the authenticity, and I went to art school, and we're talking about 20 years ago here, and I remember initially my teacher saying to me, if you're going to take a photograph, and back in those days, by the way, you had films, you had to buy, camera reels. So you only had, my teacher would always say, you have one shot, make sure you take it perfectly, because otherwise, obviously, you're wasting every single time. So there was no digital back in those days. So you learn. So I learned, okay, when I'm taking it, timing's got to be perfect. You're making sure the angles, everything, lighting. But now with the way things, you can literally take a photo in the summer and change it to a wintry one. Where do you see photography going, and where do you see it now?
That's a very good point. I grew up in the transparency era, and so therefore I'd say go to India, and I wouldn't see the photos because I was there for 7 weeks. I wouldn't see the photos I've taken for more than 3 months because I had to wait until I get home. So, and you're limited because each one of those little rolls was heavy. So if you took 50 rolls with you, that's 50 by 36, okay, so which is quite a lot. Or let's say you took 40 rolls. You can't, it's hard to get more rolls on the road. And you've also got a weight limit. And therefore you had to be very careful. And back in those days, I learned pretty quickly is that you had to take the time in the field to get the photo right and not in the darkroom. And not because the darkroom, manipulating in the darkroom, what I can do on digital post-processing now in 5 minutes would have taken me 5 hours. There is no comparison. So I always had the rule is you get it right in the field. You get it right then, and post-processing is at a minimum. And I still hold to that. I mean, I can tell you what I post-process. I do color balance, I do cropping, I do contrast control because transparency is better than digital for contrast. I'll do straightening. I've always been hopeless at getting straight photos. Trust me, it's awful. And this is all I do. I mean, I really, and if there's a dirt on the lens, I'll use the little thing to get rid of the dirt. But I just don't go into that. For me, the art of photography, and photography is an art, is the art of photography, actually the photo. What we're seeing a lot of now is the art of post-processing, and that's not photography. That is a very different form of art, and that is old school. My growing up in photography was in the 80s, and that is when the art of photography was around everywhere. So you are right; it has changed. I can see why people put themselves in photos, and I don't have a problem with them putting themselves in photos. But if you look at my Instagram, there's only 2 photos of me in all my hundreds of photos of Instagram. One was the first photo, hey, I'm here on Instagram, and the only other one was this is my 100th country, and this is the philosophy I've learned when traveling. I just don't put myself in the photos. It just doesn't interest me. But I do think it is heading in that direction. And I've heard it from other photographers that making money now is harder and harder because of that. If I was only relying on photography for an income, that would definitely be a harder thing to do now than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago and even 30 years ago. It is significantly more difficult to do that now. The prices for photos is coming down. It's just becoming harder. So I agree with you, and I can't see that trend not changing. I just can't. I just cannot see the person who is taking the photo not being the center of the photo. The role of personality in social media is still very strong in terms of it's very personality driven. The person who takes the photo, go back to the 80s, 90s, you'd never see photographers in their own photos. They might do one so they could use it as a publicity shot, but that's it. You'd never see it. Now, the ease of it means it's more accessible, and I just can't see that changing. I still think there will be a demand for what I consider traditional travel photography, but I don't think it will be eliminated. I just don't think it will be eliminated. But the demand for it it's past its peak. Its peak is gone, and it won't reach those days again.
I think you make some good points, and the problem is, everyone can take a photo. You can take photos on your camera, on your phone these days, and so almost everyone's become a photographer in that sense. But you made a point where when you take a photo, you take it right on the field, and
Yes.
if you're having to rely upon post-production, then as a photographer, anyone listening as a photographer, then you're in big trouble because
That's correct. Yes.
because otherwise you're not really doing what you should be doing. So, but as you just said there, the art of it, the skill set, because of digital era, because of post-production, it's become easier for people. Well, as you just said, you're not going to make money from it. You're probably going to have other skill sets along with it, which has made it harder for photographers. But it is a sad state. I hope it goes back the other way, but I can't see it with the way social media is these days. So it is what it is, unfortunately. You started this Twitter chat a good few years ago now. Now, this Twitter chat, I get involved with it myself. I started it last year. It's quite a phenomenon. How did it all start? And did you envision it to be this successful and this long?
Okay, it's actually almost 380 consecutive weeks. We started in November 2013, the first week of November, and we've never missed a week. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to swap the interviewer. You've been part of the chat. Why do you like it? Why do you like it?
I love the fact that you get to see people from all over the world putting out photos, talking about their experiences. Again, places where people don't go to, and that is the uniqueness to it, you see. So each week you change the subject each week. So one week it could be about the deserts, another week it could be about adventures and waterfalls or whatever. Just the interaction as well, the people that you speak to, and I think it's wonderful.
Thank you very much. And what you said is why it attracts people. Because it's different. Now, how it started was, and I still have the tweet. I took a screenshot of the tweet. It's sitting somewhere. And I was on another Twitter chat with two other people, Ariana and Savannah. And we started talking about Afghanistan. And all of us had been to Afghanistan. And we were all talking. And we were talking about what an amazing, the hospitality, the incredible scenery, most beautiful country I've seen. And I said, and the tweet was, do you know there could be a Twitter chat in this? Let's talk further. Because we were talking about places that no one else had been to. And so we called it the Road Less Travel. And for the first chat, we had 21 people. 21 back then. And then suddenly it just exploded because it was the only chat, and it is still the only chat after all these years, which is quite astonishing, where people will share about places around the world that people normally don't see in Twitter chats. I mean, we've had in the last few months. I mean, I always share Afghanistan. We've had Ethiopia. We've had didn't someone share Chad recently? I think someone shared Chad. Yeah, Stuart. He shared Chad, I think it was recently. So we've had Chad. We have places like Liberia. We get Central Asia, we get Central America, we get places within countries that are more popularly traveled that hardly anyone sees anyway. And therefore it's kept to its name that people can share these places. And one of the reasons for suggesting starting it was so many times I would share places from, say, Kurdistan or Yemen or Syria or Somaliland or parts of Ethiopia, and people will ask me, is it safe? And I kind of got a little bit tired of people asking me, is it safe? In the approximately 380 weeks of doing the chat, and I've been there for almost every week, I've only seen one person ask someone else, is it safe? Was that destination safe? Once in 380 weeks. It is just not something that's done. People, if you go to a place that's different, people trust each other in the community to know that if you've gone there, we know it's safe at the time you went there. And people can be proud of their place, their part of the world, though many people can't go there, and people are genuinely interested. What you said as well, it's very welcoming. I manually send out welcome tweets every week. It's not automated. It's every week. I just sit down there, Thank goodness Twitter went from 140 to 280 characters because it's half the tweets now to send out. So it's only a few minutes instead of a lot longer. And so I send that out, and it's very personal. We welcome people. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. It's rare to see a disagreement. Rare, very rare to see a disagreement during TRLT where people disagree about a method of travel like slow travel or something. It's not common. Everyone just accepts people for how they are. And for 1 hour a week, we provide that inspiration. And people know, and we've had in the past year, people have not been at the chat for years. The last time I remember seeing some people 2014, 2015, and then they know we're on 1 p.m. US Eastern Time, summer or winter, every Tuesday, without fail. We never miss a week ever. And people can come back and know, hey, it's 1 p.m. I'm just going to come back. And suddenly people turn up that we haven't seen for years. And that is the beauty. That consistency is very important. So we're welcoming, we're inspiring, we accept people, we allow people to contribute questions, so therefore it feels part of the community, and we have that consistency, and that has been the secret of TRLT. And as I said, anyone can join us free. Come along. There's no cost to pay to come, and that's whether you are a private traveller. And our balance is quite different. We get a lot of people whose job is not in the travel industry. And this is quite different. So how often have you seen in the chat where people come and says, I've just had to leave the office, or I'm on the train on the way home, and they are participating in the chat. So this is quite different, where the people we attract are not in the industry. We have, I'd say it would have to be at least half of people are not actually in the travel industry. And the biggest TRLT meet we ever had was in Utrecht, in Netherlands. This was a few years ago. And I think we had 14 people, and I think only 4 of those people were actually in the travel industry. The rest were just people who travel when they have leave from their work or something like that. And we've maintained that. So yes, we have travel brands come in. Yes, we have people like myself full-time in the industry, but we have a lot of people who travel when they can. They earn their money, they save, and they use TRLT as a place to say, well, for my next holidays, I've got 3 weeks. I've got some more travel ideas because of TRLT. And it's community is number one, and that's the important thing. TRLT exists because community is number one. It is not a money-making exercise. It is not an exercise to build my profile or any other profiles of the hosts in there. And we have fantastic hosts. And without the hosts, this chat would not exist. I can tell you now, I'm the only founder left. And if I didn't have these hosts now, this chat would have stopped. The hosts are the ones that keep this going. No one is there to do that. People are there to share that common love of travel to less traveled places. And that is what makes the community so strong.
You just mentioned there, I feel like a part of the community. So when I share my photo, in fact, I think it was last week where I shared a photo of me going to Zimbabwe, and it took 36 hours to get there. And I spoke about how I was naive when I got there and thinking you can withdraw cash from ATMs. Now I shared the tips, you know. Whenever you go to Zimbabwe, at the time when I went, actually, I'm not too sure now, but don't think you're going to be withdrawing cash from ATMs. Make sure you take physical cash with you, because in an era where you don't have to. So things like that. And I think that's what really makes the chat really engaging. You see people from all over the world messaging, and and it's that 1 hour. I know exactly what time it is here in the UK. It's 6 o'clock. I know exactly what time it is.
One thing is, and stress again, the community is king. The whole reason of doing this chat was never to make money. It was just to give people a voice, to share their experiences from places without people thinking, oh, that's dangerous, or is that safe? People just accept it. When you shared Zimbabwe, did anyone say, oh, why did you go to Zimbabwe? Did anyone?
No one.
No,
In
that's
fact,
right.
people were like, oh wow, this is amazing, and the interaction was crazy. So that's the beauty of it.
Exactly right. So, and I think this is something we're finding more and more with travel, that having that community around you, or what you want to talk about, what your passion is in travel. So it could be luxury travel, or solo travel, or the road less travel. Having that community is essential nowadays, and it's getting harder on social media. It is harder to build a community because it's a bit of a pay-to-play situation, but it is still possible. But having a community around you is critical if you want to build your profile on social media, build your community, find your advocates, nurture your advocates, encourage your advocates, bring them in, bring them closer to you, and that is how to build a community on social media.
How do you relax? Have you got a family? Do you
Yes.
play board games? How do you relax?
Yeah, computer games, board games, cooking,
Oh,
walking with the daughter. Yeah, I've been playing board games. I actually carry small board games, little card games with me when I travel on my own, because the thing is, if you're delayed somewhere and you don't want to go through your phone's only got a certain amount of charge, even with that charger, then I could just sit there, get a little table, and do these games. And these are not card games like, spades, hearts, diamonds, clubs. These are actually dedicated card games. And so I've always done that. I love music, always loved music. If people ask me my favorite era of music, and I listen to everything from punk, post punk, to choral music. And my favorite era of music is actually Renaissance music and polyphony, especially from Italy in I think it's the 15th century. So we're looking at a very niche area. You ask people about polyphony, most people go, huh, what? But occasionally someone says, oh, yes, I love polyphony as well. I'm like, my goodness, what a revelation. But like this, never ever bored. I'm someone who's never ever had a problem with the life work balance. I've never ever had, oh my goodness, I'm working too hard. Never. I've always found that balance. I've always found time to spend time with the family, to cook, to go for walks, to watch movies, love movies, to play computer games. To always had time. There's never, and even working from home, I enforce a weekend. We have enforced weekends, which is usually Sunday, Monday. Sometimes Sunday, if I'm working in Dubai, Sunday's work day, so that rule gets broken. But generally, Sunday I don't even open email, so it just sits there, and it's important to have that balance.
absolutely. Work-life balance is really important, and sometimes people do get that wrong. And so when it's all work, 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 you got to have to sort of balance it out with your life. And it sounds like you've got a family that supports you as well. And as you said, playing games along the way when there's a low period, that's always good. So you're living in Nairobi, I believe in Kenya, which is a place where I've been wanting to get to. In fact, it was meant to be on my plans for last year, but didn't quite happen, obviously for obvious reasons. But hopefully, I can get there very soon.
You would love it, but you know what's interesting? Since I left Australia on December 17, 2012, I've never been back even for a day.
All right, okay, you actually never gone back to
I've
Australia.
never gone back for even a day. So it makes the journey even more interesting in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, travel's just a fantastic places. And what I'd encourage people to do is that when you can travel again, think of these places that are not covered with tourists and that may have, or should I say, have incorrect safety perceptions. People think, oh, Shane, you go to dangerous places. No, I don't. I go to places with false safety perceptions. That's where I go. And every country has safe and dangerous places, almost every. And most countries which have bad perceptions are far safer than those that have normal perceptions. Listen to people who have travelled there, speak to locals who have been there, don't listen to the media, don't listen to people who haven't been there. When you get to travel again, take a chance to explore the road less travelled.
Would you want to not go back to Australia very
Oh,
soon?
yes, I will, but I always thought that I wanted to get this career set up. And
Okay.
now with a family, I'd only go if the family came, and that's a major undertaking. It's a long process to get there. At the moment, it will happen. It will happen. There's a lot of family friends I'd love to see there, but it's not top priority at the moment. There are other things that are probably, from a career perspective and a family perspective, that need more attention than a trip back to Australia. And that's not saying the career and family perspective has crises. It's just that things are good. It's just that there are things, the time and money and energy we'd like to do before doing that. One day, absolutely. It's not, it's just forbidden to go back. It's just that the opportunity hasn't presented itself, and it is a long way to go. I mean, I can tell you more about long haul flights than most people in this world, having lived in there and travelled almost every long haul flight and every overseas trip, apart from the South Pacific. So It will happen one day, but it's not a priority. It's just not a priority.
Well, Shane, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time, and I'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you very much.
I thoroughly enjoyed my talk with Shane, and I hope you took something away from our discussion. If you'd like to see what Shane gets up to next or get involved in the weekly Twitter chat, you can visit his website and follow him on all of his social media platforms. The details are on your screen now. That's it for Take a Wonder with Shebs. Hope to see you all very soon. Until next time, bye for now.